Hi there, I'm James. I'm the Invasive Species Officer for Southwest Lakes, and I'm here today at Burrator Reservoir to show you and tell you about the American signal crayfish. American signal crayfish were first introduced to this country in the 70s as a form of fisheries diversification and for a food item. They quickly became an invasive non-native species, which means that they negatively affect our environment, economy, or human health. So it turns out that the American signal crayfish carries a disease called the crayfish plague, which is extremely fatal to the native crayfish, the white claw crayfish. The American signal crayfish is also invasive by directly outcompeting native species for food, shelter, and other resources. It also engineers its habitat by creating burrows and causing erosion. Because of the crayfish plague, and also how small a crayfish can be, that makes it so important to be aware of what you may inadvertently be carrying around with you as you use our reservoirs. If you participate in recreational activities such as paddle sports, sailing, or angling, you could accidentally be carrying crayfish or a crayfish plague or any other of our invasive non-native species around. And that is why it's so important to know the check, clean, and dry principles, which basically mean check your kit for any visible signs of invasive species, clean your kit thoroughly, and thoroughly dry it, ideally with sunlight. Because invasive non-native species are so damaging to the environment, there's actually a lot of legislation in place that prevents the spread of these species, and it's actually illegal to transport these alive or release them back into the wild. It's illegal to trap for these species without prior consent from the Environment Agency and special permits. Many people ask, can you eat them? And yes, they are edible, but even though they're edible doesn't mean you should eat them. And I always discourage people from eating any invasive species because people will start to think of those species as a good thing and they won't want to get rid of them. People also ask me a lot, can I set traps out for them? And I always have to say no, we do not allow trapping of crayfish on our reservoirs because of the risks associated with accidental spread of the crayfish themselves and the crayfish plague. So the American signal crayfish is identifiable most notably by its white or turquoise spots on the hinge of its claw. The other thing is that on this ridge here, on an American signal crayfish, it will be completely smooth, but on a native crayfish there are actually two barbs, and so for very small ones this is a good way of identifying them. And because they come in variable colors, and sometimes the spot on its hinge isn't so noticeable. Yeah, so this is obviously a much smaller crayfish. You can see its color is quite different from the first one. It's still got a white spot on its hinge, but it's less noticeable. But of course this would still be smooth around there. So this here is a female, and you can actually see around this time of the year they start to what we call berry. So this is a berried female, meaning it's laid its eggs, and around this time of the year they start to fertilize the eggs, and the female will carry these eggs over winter until the spring, where they hatch. And here you can see the differences in the size. This is probably maybe 2 years old. When they're first born, they're maybe the size of 2 grains of rice. So they're very small, and when they're first kind of released into the wild.